Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to our 24th Thought Leader session. My name is Marzia Zafar, and I'm the Director of our Policy and Planning Division. These sessions are a Policy and Planning Division project designed to encourage creative thinking about issues affecting the industries we regulate. Today's session is about the intersection between regulation and innovation. The discussion will be about how government and entrepreneurs can help create a better environment to foster innovation and ultimately create a better product for the common good. We obviously have a very impressive panel of speakers today. I want to thank Nancy Fund for helping me get Elon Musk and Lyndon Reeve here today. Nancy is a founder and managing partner at DBL Investors and our co-organizer for this event. Thank you very much, Nancy. I also want to thank CPUC President Mike Peavy for his leadership, his continued support of these efforts, and for pushing us always to be better. Paul Clannon, the Executive Director of the Commission, will moderate this session, and he is my boss, so I thank him on a daily basis. And before I forget to, before I turn it over to Paul to start the session, let me just go over a few logistics and a very quick safety briefing. First, this session is also being webcast and broadcast to our overflow rooms today. I wish I could have magically enlarged this room to accommodate everyone. We tried different venues, but either they would cost money that we don't have or paperwork that I didn't want to fill out. Second, when we get to the audience Q&A session, we have a 45-minute Q&A session with the audience. Please wait for me or Michael Colvin to come to you and bring you the microphone. And that will start at 2:45. And third and finally, in the event of an emergency, please calmly proceed out the exits to the rear of the auditorium. We also have 2 emergency exits on the sides in front of the auditorium. And now I'll let Paul take over.
Thank you, Marzia. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Paul Clannon. I'm the Commission's Executive Director. I work for the 5 commissioners here who are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the State Senate. We're a statewide agency that sets rates, something equivalent to $50 or $60 billion a year. We've got our finger in every little bit of economic activity in the state. You can view us as the infrastructure commission, a lot of us do. We're also a court system. We've got 35 judges who work in this building. We're about a medium-sized law firm. We've got about 80 lawyers working here. We're an accounting firm. We're a policy shop. We're many things, and we're here really to do one function, and that's to represent the people of California in the industries that we regulate. We are very honored today to have 3 very distinguished panelists. I'm going to, and these are the 3 guys who don't need any introduction. I'm going to do a very quick 2-sentence introduction of each. Then I'm going to ask each of them to talk for 5 minutes or so, a little bit more, a little bit less, about innovation and regulation. And then I've threatened all of them that if they don't then begin talking among themselves, I'm going to throw in some awkward questions to get them talking among themselves. Then, as Marzia said, we'll have time, a lot of time towards the end of the session for an audience-driven discussion about the topics that are raised. So immediately to my right is Elon Musk. Well known as a founder of PayPal, most excitingly to me, the driver of SpaceX and space exploration, and Tesla Motor Company. We've got former Commissioner Mark Farron here, a happy Tesla customer. Elon, possibly most excitingly to me, is the man in my life that I'm likely to meet, most likely to get me to Mars. To Elon's right is President Mike Peavy. Mike Peavy is a man of many hats. He's a labor guy. He's an enviro. He's an entrepreneur himself. For the last more than 10 years, he's been the president of the Public Utilities Commission and been the man most singly responsible for reforming the energy industry in California, with a lot of help in a lot of places, but possibly the most singly responsible for the advances that the Public Utilities Commission in California have made in renewable energy and electric vehicles and a lot of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. Mike is my boss, so I'm going to move on quickly there before I get into any trouble. And to Mike's immediate right is Lyndon Reeve. Lyndon is a guy, I hope we're going to talk a little bit about some of the interesting features of Lyndon's life away from work. Lyndon is the driver of Solar City. which is, I think, the largest provider of solar energy in the United States, is responsible for something like 1/3 of all the residential installations of solar in the United States. Think about that for a minute. About 1/3 of all the residential solar installations Lyndon is personally responsible for. I've seen some YouTube videos of you, Lyndon, from the last 6 or 7 years. As you get younger and younger and better looking, the charts always keep on heading up, and it's an impressive thing. So those are our three panelists. Let me first invite President Peavy to spend 3 to 7 minutes talking about this big subject that we're on today, and that's the intersection between innovation and regulation. Good afternoon, Mike.
Thank you very much, Paul, and it's great to see this room absolutely filled and the spillover into our other meeting rooms here and all the others that are watching, and I hope that this is a rewarding couple of hours for all the observers as well as my colleagues here sitting beside me. The question of innovation and the impact of regulation, it can be a very complicated one. Through most of history, most of the time that we've had regulation, it's been a damper on innovation. I mean, the nature of regulation is to kind of dampen innovation. I mean, what do we regulate? The Public Utilities Commission historically regulated monopoly utilities, telecom, water, and energy. And throughout much of that time, the energy sector was not known for innovative policies. It did very little in the way of R&D. That was done by a group like EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute. Same in the area of telecom. It was a damper. And nationally, all this was dramatized going back to all the way to President Carter's era when we had the Civil Aeronautics Board that regulated the airlines. There were all kinds of many airlines, and believe it or not, Ted Kennedy and others combined finally got rid of that whole process and opened up competition, and probably more innovation came out of that. And then this became the buzzword in the UK. Margaret Thatcher, Lord Parkinson, and others to break up the Central Electric Generating Board, all these different things that had been heavy-handed, and try to introduce change and innovation into the energy sector. That came to this state. That spread of that came to this state, and we tried electric deregulation in California, and for a variety of reasons, it was a crushing failure. And in fact, we're still getting monies back from all those that exploited a marketplace for tens of billions of dollars, and now 12 years after that happened, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is still in the throes of making decisions to give that money back. In telecom, if it hadn't been originally for Judge Green, AT&T might still be more or less, of course, under its more recent leadership, they've tried to re-amalgamate AT&T back to where it was in 1970. But you would have had a similar situation. But Judge Green broke up telecom. There were some other players in it, but that was basically went on and ushered in an incredible period of innovation in communications, of which we're still, to some degree in the infancy. And it's overwhelming what goes on every day. If you're not reading about Tesla in the battery business or in this business or SpaceX, you're reading about Comcast, you're reading about AT&T, you're reading about some other companies, Netflix. All these things they're all part of the communications sector today. They all came out of this change and innovation. When I came to this commission, there was a instinctive reaction. I mean, regulators like to regulate. That's what they do. I mean, you're most comfortable regulating. And light-handed regulation was not something that was encouraged. In fact, it was viewed with disfavor significantly. We managed to do that in the telecom sector in this state, and you've seen a lot of innovation come about due to that. In the electric sector, when I came here, I was appointed by then Governor Gray Davis. Some of you may remember, many of you in the audience too young to remember Gray Davis. Only I can remember Gray Davis. But he asked me to do two things when he asked me to come on this commission in early 2002. One of them was make it greener, which I think we've done in considerable fashion, and the other was to be, in effect, be a little more light-handed in terms of regulation. I have been committed to the latter course all the time I've been here. And I think, and here's where I'm going to flip the whole issue from is regulation a damper on innovation to can regulation, positive regulation, and that's in the eye of the beholder, of course, what's positive, but can positive regulation be an incentive, an inspiration to innovation? And I think the history of this California Public Utilities Commission over the past 10 to 12 years has been the latter, that we have been the precursor, the sponsor of innovative policies across the board in the energy field. And now, in the interest of time, I'll only mention a few. We came up with a loading order. The loading order is just a nice way of saying priorities, and priorities were energy efficiency, number one, renewables, number two, and then some conventional power plants and so forth. That was a big, big step at the time, and to endorse energy efficiency and to be willing to put significant amounts of money into energy efficiency was something that was looked upon with disfavor by much of the corporate behemoths of California and anywhere else at that time. 10 years later, Chevron runs ads extolling energy efficiency as number one in the priority list. That's something that to some degree has flown from their experiences. After all, they are a California headquartered corporation. We said we would limit by setting standards for power plants the power plant emissions have to be equal to a combined cycle gas turbine plant. That, in effect, closed the door to the importation of coal into California, a very innovative step in a way. We didn't say ban coal, we said you have to meet an emission standard of this type. I think that was very positive regulation. And then, Governor Schwarzenegger came to this commission and asked me, after 2 years of trying to get his Million Solar Roofs program adopted by the legislature, can you do something at the Public Utilities Commission? I said, I'll get back to you in 90 days. We did it, and then the legislature ratified it. That's exactly what happened. And the most recent thing that we've done, again, in this, and not so much in the energy space now, is we've endorsed, all my colleagues collectively, a little misgivings at the start, but everybody came along, we endorsed a shared economy. We did that by creating something new that we call transportation network companies, a category that allows Uber, Sidecar, Lyft, and others to participate today with adequate consumer protections, insurance and all that, as a part of a new wave of transportation, a new wave of people getting around and interrelating and so forth. And now they get so innovative that last night, if you got on at Market and Beale Street and came up to Gulf Street in an Uber car at 6 p.m., you paid $60. They're doing time-of-day pricing now, which is a little steep, and I'm not paying that again. I'm back on the Muni, I promise you. But
Mike, it raises the obvious question: how do you know that?
Because I was on the Uber. I was there. Anyway, the point is, actually, it was my daughter meeting me who was on Uber, meeting me at an excellent restaurant down the street here called Rich Table, I might add. But in any case, so you can go either way with this, and I think in this state, with the strong support of my colleagues, we have chosen a regulatory scheme that in the telecom area is light-handed, and in the energy area, to some degree is guided. I mean, the successes of companies like Solar City and all are a function of some of the public policies that's set by this commission and other parts of state government, the California Energy Commission and elsewhere. So you can come out positively, you can come out negatively on this. Historically, regulation dampen innovation. Today, at least in this state, I think we're trying to stimulate innovation, and I think there's some success stories that point the way further to do that. Thank you very much.
Elon, you've worked across a number of industries that are both incredibly innovative and also very closely regulated, at least in some aspects: financial services, automobiles, rocket ships. What about this intersection between innovation and regulation?
Well, I think, particularly in cases. Sorry, yeah, there we go. So I think, particularly in cases where there are, monopoly providers or duopoly providers, where it's the free market can't operate effectively. Obviously, utilities being one of those things. It's kind of, it would be unwieldy to have multiple electricity lines going to every house and building, so it sort of lends itself to a monopoly, or at least historically has. And so in order to avoid monopolies doing what monopolies tend to do with respect to pricing, that there have to be regulations and to make sure that things are fair and reasonable. So, and I think the regulators can therefore play an extremely important role in the advent of sustainable energy by ensuring that there is a means for people to establish solar on their roof or to buy wind and other renewables, and essentially to make sure that the right thing happens. In the absence of firm action by the regulators, I think the right thing would not happen. So, I'm glad to see that in place. And I think that regulators deserve a lot of credit, because they do face a huge amount of pressure from these huge incumbent companies, and it's pretty hard to resist that pressure sometimes. So I think it's a tough and often thankless job, but I'd like to say thank you now, at least. But I think what we're facing here is with respect to energy. I mean, just to sort of look at it from a high level, it is very important for us to move to clean, sustainable energy, and the sooner we do that, the better off the world is. But it is going to be some amount of strife for the existing utilities, and particularly the ones that are sort of heavy into fossil fuels and that kind of thing. So it is going to be a bit of a hardship for them, but there's no choice. We've either got to decide that we're going to go towards clean, sustainable energy or not. And if we decide, okay, yeah, we want a good future, because the only good future is when we have sustainable energy, then we've got to make the hard decisions that are necessary to achieve that objective. From the standpoint of, say, SolarCity and Tesla, SolarCity is obviously trying its best to lower the cost of solar power. So if somebody wants to put solar power in their home or business, obviously it's got to be affordable, it's got to be competitive, and it's quite a tough job just getting all of the costs associated with getting a customer on board and designing a solar system for a roof and installing it, and with all the installation hardware and the wiring and the inverter, and the after-sales service and the permitting, and a lot of it is kind of boring and kind of unglamorous stuff, but it's got to be done. And I think Lyndon and the team at SolarCity are doing an amazing job at that. And then there's this this question of storage that's important, because obviously the sun only shines for part of the day, and we need electricity all of the day, all of the night. So that's what storage is pretty important for that. It's also important for just regulating power production through the grid, so you can minimize sort of the spikes that occur at various times of day. So we're working at Tesla to create stationary battery packs that also, the cost is super important, but they've also got to last long. They've got to be super safe. They need to be quite compact, which is important particularly for houses. Somebody doesn't have like a whole room to put a giant battery pack in. It's like, what happened to your guest bedroom? Well, it's got a battery pack in it right now, and that's not going to work. So it's got to be something that's really compact. That you can sort of like mount flush up against the wall, maybe only sticks out like 3 or 4 inches, in your garage or something like that, and that you don't even notice it's there. Like that's the ideal kind of stationary storage pack that you'd want. And then on the roof, you want to make the solar panels as aesthetically appealing as possible. In the ideal scenario, the solar system actually makes the roof look better. I think that's like a scenario that I think would really work and would scale to a very huge degree. So that's what we're working towards. Thanks.
Thank you, Elon. Lyndon, you've been, I was about to say on the ground floor of the change in the energy economy. I guess I should say the rooftop of the change in the energy economy, which means that you've been involved in a lot of the what Elon describes as sort of the unglamorous but necessary work of getting the commercial agreements worked out and the manufacturing and the quality control, getting the customers educated, getting the utilities calmed down. You've been at this now for a number of years. What have you learned about regulation, about its impact on the innovation you've been trying to do?
Yeah, I have a deep appreciation for the importance of regulation since getting into this business, more than I expected.
Do you want to just stop there? Is that, yeah?
But regulation is so broad, and I was thinking about it before this panel. Regulation has so many important things that it covers, but what's one big thing that it has to address? And that is a market failure. This is the big time for regulation to step in if there's a specific market failure. And climate change today is a market failure. We've essentially put the cost of burning fossil fuels externally, and there's a market failure that's occurring. And so this is where regulation has to step in to address this issue. California has done a great job. As President PV has mentioned earlier, there was a Million Home Initiative. It really has helped put the entire U.S. on the map for renewable energy. Salt Lake City itself has a 1 million customer goal. It was a 5-year goal, now it's 4.5 years. So California is really leading the space. But in order to have regulation make changes, they need alternatives. And this is where the innovation comes in, because you can't just, okay, the existing problem is broken, fix that. You have to allow innovation to occur to fix the problem. And if you put an end goal in place, then everybody can innovate, and you put a system in place, with the regulators put a system in place where you can allow competition, which is the primary cause of innovation. If you didn't have competition, would you think you have to create a better phone? Would you think you need to create a faster car or a more comfortable car? Would you do anything better if it was just good enough? So this is the importance of regulation. Allow competition, allow innovation. You have an end goal, and that is to decarbonize the energy infrastructure. It removes the debates, it removes the hurdles, everybody goes towards that goal, and then innovation will occur. Part of this change, it actually will help the economy. So you provide a lower cost energy to the consumer that is clean. During this transition, you employ thousands of jobs. So just Salt Lake City itself, we have 5,000 employees. Actually, Monday we'll hit 5,000, like 4,900 and something. But Monday we hit 5,000 mark, of which half of them are in California, a little less than half, but about half of them in California. So the innovation's occurring, the technology is here, with the single focus providing cheaper, cleaner energy. So all the solutions are possible. We know it's there. So then you fast forward and you go, okay, 30 years from now, if we have a heart-to-heart with our kids who's highly educated at the point, and they go, okay, let me get this straight. You knew there's a problem in climate change. No debate. You absolutely knew there's a problem in climate change. You knew you had to fix it. You created a solution and you started deploying the technology. You saw it in practice and saw that it works really well. And then you decided to cap it? What? Why? So I think that's the part that we have to look at. We have to decarbonize our energy infrastructure. In this, how do we do it? How do we bring innovation and competition? Or actually, how do you bring competition, which will then drive innovation? Thanks.
Lyndon, thank you. So I want to focus in, there are lots of innovations that are needed to accomplish decarbonizing the energy infrastructure of the world. I want to focus in on one that Elon mentioned, and that's storage. Elon, you're often asked, because of your level of success across multiple industries, what's the secret sauce? I hope, by the way, you'll actually reveal that to me privately later. And I've heard you answer in a very interesting way, and that is to encourage people, I think the way you describe it is, don't reason from analogy, reason from the physics of the situation. Right. Go back to first principles and build your solution, build your innovation from that. Let me invite you to walk us through, let's take storage as an example, or another one if you should choose that, and just walk me through how you do that. What are the physics of storage over the next 5 or 10 years in a regulated realm that you want regulators and people interested in regulation to hear about?
Okay.
And you have 90 seconds, 89, yeah. 88.
Right, exactly. Let's see. Well, I mean, so we know what the energy density is of current production lithium-ion cells, and we know a lot about their current life and their cycle life, and it's so it's sort of at around 260 watt-hours per kilogram. We also know what the price is of the cell. We know what the price of the cell is as made by, say, Panasonic, our main supplier.
A battery cell.
Yeah, the battery cell. But there's another way to look at the cost of the cell, which is to say, okay, what are the constituents of the cell? And if you were to buy those raw materials on, say, the London Metal Exchange, or the international commodity markets, and had a magic wand and could sort of reassemble those raw materials into cell form, that tells you asymptotically what the true cost of energy storage can be. It seems like a pretty obvious thing to do. And so the primary constituents of our cell right now, the number one is nickel. Nickel is a very common metal. It's used in stainless steel and a bunch of other things. Cobalt, aluminum, and then on the anode side it is carbon, which is actually made from a little bit of coal. But only a little.
We don't really use that word in this room. Yeah.
just a dash, and a tiny bit of it, and so that stuff's all. And then the can itself is a stainless steel can, and this stuff's all pretty obvious to price. And if you actually look at, say, okay, what's the price for materials? It's it's substantially below $100 a kilowatt hour at the cell level, substantially below that. So, maybe sort of 60 or 70 or something like that. And we know it's possible to get more energy per unit mass over time. So there are things that there are better cells than the cell we currently have that are working and have been cycled a lot. So therefore, if you were to scale up simply the existing chemistry that we have, and to vertically integrate it so that you could reduce the logistics costs and and just make it a lot more sort of efficient, and have better economies of scale, you can get way closer to the raw material cost than we currently are at. So that's like what I mean by first principles. You can say, oh, okay, that's what's possible, and then you got to figure out, okay, how do you get there?
And let me take it from there. I want at this stage to recognize, sitting in the front here, Commissioner Carla Peterman, who's recently confirmed by the State Senate to her term here on the Commission, and has been the lead commissioner on the PUC's storage proceeding, which just set a very ambitious 1,200 megawatt goal for storage. And so with the first principles, with the physics of the situation that we just heard from Elon, Mike Peavy, let me turn it to you. So what does the regulator do So there are price and efficiency benefits to be gained in storage. We know that storage is an important part of decarbonizing the future. What should the regulator be doing to not to dampen innovation, but to inspire it?
Well, I think we did it. Ms. Peterman, you want to stand? Take a bow. I mean, actually, it was 1,350 megawatts. I think is the goal for this decade, which is I hope turns out to be a de minimis goal. Truly, we have to do. I mean, here's another perfect example of regulation acting in a very positive way, stimulating a new market that was coming along, but coming along at a slower pace, and then we're incentivizing that market in California. But the market was coming along on its own. I mean, I mentioned today at this morning's meeting being on Maui a couple of weeks ago, and how much wind there is on Maui, and how it's backed up with a very significant storage system. But I mean, the future is all the things you're going to be able to do with electric vehicles and all the other things that make storage such an essential part. And I think that you'll find that this commission will develop and adopt policies consistent with the fastest spread of this technology that can be done. I can't speak for other states. I can only speak for California, but I think we'll do that.
So, Lyndon, there you've heard it. We've got the basic physics. They're all lined up. The regulator has done apparently everything we need to do. So where's our storage?
Actually, a very good point. I have some on that. There's no doubt that the technology will get there. There's no doubt that storage will be cost-effective combined with solar and deliver electricity at night. There's no doubt it will get there. But we all know that is the game-changing product. That is the game-changing product. So the challenge that you have when you have the game-changing product and the technology is approaching, those in the game don't want to change the game. They really like the existing game. The existing game is sole source, cost-plus model. It's a really good game. So where regulation can really help when inspiring innovation is to not only look at the innovation itself, but look at the entire process that the innovation gets applied and that the constraints of the application of the innovation is not constrained. A simple example would be California came up with this great S-chip program to allow storage. It's awesome. It's great.
And that's the Self-Generation Incentive Program, SGIP.
And so we've had hundreds of customers apply to this. We're deploying the batteries. They're on our customers, they're on the walls. They can't connect. So it's taking, on average, about 8 months to get them to connect. There's no reason. And when the person arrives to connect it, they do nothing but just check and say, yes, it's on. It's really, really basic. If the utility does not have the resource, maybe outsource it to a third party. It's simple to fix. But you can't help yourself think that the reason why it's slow is the behavior incentive is not to change the game. So the way you don't change the game is you delay the game from changing. So that's a really key place where regulation can get in, create the innovation, and make sure that the roadblocks aren't intentionally put there to prevent the adoption of that innovation.
Is the average wait 8 months?
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
That's crazy.
I think you take some comfort that after today it'll come down.
Okay.
All right, let's take a meta look at the discussion that we just had. So we went from physics to regulatory policy to on the ground. That's all great. It's taken 8 months even to get my phone call answered. What are the mechanisms, and Mike Peavy, I turn to you here. What are the mechanisms within government, among the regulators, that regulators need to be thinking about that we're not thinking about now, about how to solve these problems? You've now had the experience for 10 years coming in from outside government and running a powerful government agency with many successes and, I think you'd agree, some failures in getting programs to happen. What does the grizzled, experienced 11-year President Mike Peavy say to the brand new President Mike Peavy 11 years ago that you should be out talking to regulators and legislators about the one habit of mind that they should form to eliminate that problem that Lyndon just put on the table?
Well, I mean, this is, the problem that Lyndon has described is, it's so basic to change in every venue all the time, right? I mean, I have to laugh when I think back that in 15 years ago, I created a company called New Energy Ventures, which we ended up selling to AES and now Constellation Energy. And we went through, we put in new meters. We put in meters for all our commercial customers. And the utilities would not come out and disconnect the old meter and put in and attach the new meter. It's the same game. They were called DASRs, Direct Access Service Requests, and they would just stall and stall and stall. Classic was the Macy's store here in San Francisco. If you know the Macy's store, it over time has grown from just being an O'Farrell and Stockton to now having openings on Geary Street and so forth. There were 3 different meters serving that store because of just historically. We could never get the incumbent utility, who will remain nameless, to send somebody out there to take out these meters. You know, I mean, it went on and on and on. Anyway, we ended up threatening with a lawsuit, and things changed. But it's just a natural thing. But in every venue, everywhere. So whether it's landing slots at LaGuardia Airport or this or whatever, you're always going to have this kind of resistance from the incumbents, and it's motivated by economics, and you can understand it. And you know, where you stand on a lot of these issues depends on where you sit, and where you sit depends on what the income stream is. So I mean, you know, there you are. Now, for me, looking back on this, I only wish that. I mean, because Paul's right, we did have some frustrations. I got this commission, we voted to create a climate institute at the University of California, spend $60 million a year in research and everything else. The legislature thwarted it because it wasn't, quote, their program. Looking back, I wish I'd spent more time courting the legislature. That's not an easy thing to do, since if I had my way, I wouldn't have a legislature. But
you're aware your microphone is on, right?
And it's,
Right.
and it's those kind of comments that have got me into trouble in the other area. But spending more time trying to be more inclusive in trying to bring all the parties to all the participants at the party along at more or less the same pace together. But you know, when you're running fast like these two gentlemen on my left and right are, you don't have time to go courting all those parties. You're just, I mean, your own patience is, you know, you want to get ahead, get ahead. And I shared some of that, and that's called frustration and lack of tolerance for the status quo. But as I look back, and I have a little more gray hair than either one of them, although they'll get there in time, I think that a little bit more foreplay or romance, if you will.
Okay, again,
would have been
microphone
better.
on.
I really appreciate that advice.
Elon, I hesitate to ask you to react to what you just heard, but I will invite you to do that.
All very innocent.
I'll invite you to tell us what you're thinking now, and especially I'm interested in your experience of having worked not just with economic regulators, but with financial regulators, safety regulators, lots of folks when you've been doing innovations. Who does it well? Who does it the best? And what's different about them?
Sorry, I'm just, my mind's reeling just from the foreplay and utilities.
Well, go see The Wolf on Wall Street.
Yeah. Actually, you know what's great is the Lego movie. I really like the Lego movie. It's really great.
Okay, I know what the headline tomorrow's now going to be.
Everything is awesome. So let's see. In terms of regulation, well, yeah, I do think I mean, you know, nobody's perfect. No institution is perfect. I think, on balance, California is doing a pretty good job on the regulatory front. And you know, there's some battles we've got to figure out, like, you know, how to have it not take 8 months to just get somebody's, you know, battery pack connected. But overall, pretty good. And yeah, I'm trying to think, like, you know, I think generally in the U.S., I think our regulatory body is pretty good. And yeah, I'm trying to think like.
Let's talk about Mars.
Okay.
Let me point you in a slightly different direction. So a lot of what you're doing now is innovating in spaces where there are very long-term incumbents, the automobile industry, the space industry, if that's a term you can use about space. What made you think those areas were ripe for innovation, and what the heck makes you think you can be successful competing against all the expertise in the world?
Well, I definitely wouldn't compete against all the expertise in the world, but it would be. I mean, in the case of SolarCity and Tesla, it's really about trying to solve the sustainable energy problem, and we just obviously. The way I approach things, like sort of think about the future and try to envision the future, and what has what could have a really negative effect on that outcome, and what do we really need to solve in order for it to be a positive future, one where we can be sort of optimistic and inspired about the future. And if we don't have sustainable energy, obviously we're screwed. So even if there weren't environmental damage occurring, if the energy is not sustainable, if it's not renewable, then we'll run out of it. Like, we'll eventually run out of stuff to mine and burn. And actually, it's kind of crazy that we're burning things like oil, because that has much higher value in, say, the plastics industry or something. And so it's like burning the furniture in your house, instead of firewood. So anyway, so my motivation for Tesla and SolarCity was just try to do something in sustainable power generation and sustainable power consumption. And I thought Tesla at the beginning, I thought we would probably fail. Although I should say at the beginning of SolarCity, I thought SolarCity would probably succeed. Got a lot of faith in Lennon and the rest of the team. And I also thought SpaceX would fail. So it's kind of surprising to me that they're all they didn't fail yet.
So what was it about the two? So why did you think the automobile and the space industry were the ones where failure would happen, and SolarCity is where success would happen?
Well, I thought when I started SpaceX, I didn't know anything about aerospace really. I had a sort of physics background, but I didn't really know how to build rockets or build anything really, any kind of physical object. So I thought that seemed like it would be very unlikely to succeed. And in fact, the first 3 launches of SpaceX didn't succeed. So this was not like a totally crazy position to take. And in the beginning of SpaceX, I'd really just reserved money for three failures. So we never had 3 failures. And then we just barely had enough to scrape together to do a 4th flight. Unfortunately, that succeeded, but it was a real close call. If that 4th flight hadn't succeeded, it would have been game over there. With Tesla, we had multiple near-death experiences. Again, what are the odds of a car company succeeding? I think pretty darn low. And in fact, at Tesla, we came within a few days of being bankrupt. And we closed the financing round at the end of 2008 on the last hour of the last day that it was possible to do that, which was basically 6 p.m. Christmas Eve 2008. And we would have gone bankrupt a few days after Christmas. So, these are real close calls, I'd say.
Lyndon, what's the close call 10 years from now that we need to worry about? Let's say that everything that's on your mind now as a barrier has been solved. We've got the regulatory structures in place, the consumers are educated, the market is being served. What's the next generation of challenges that regulators and legislatures, which don't move quickly, need to be thinking about now?
It's funny. I really don't think we're going to have a problem 10 years from now. At that point, everybody agrees, decarbonize the infrastructure. So everybody's marching towards that. I think the biggest challenge we have is the next 5 years. So this is getting everybody into that camp that we're all solving that problem is just going to take a little momentum. I was actually speaking to a large utility in Europe just recently, and they had a similar approach. So, the first phase, they resisted the first phase. And now Germany specifically has about a 5% penetration of solar. And it is happening. Let's get on board. Let's create a business model that solves this problem. So then everybody starts collaborating and solving the problem versus putting up these roadblocks that doesn't solve the problem. So I'd say over the next 5 years in the US, there will be these roadblocks that prevent the problem being solved. And then over 5, maybe 8 years, then it's going to be, okay, the problem's getting solved. Innovative business models will get created to addressing this problem, and we'll start transforming the way energy is delivered.
Paul, let me just say a couple things about this question. You have to have the right policy construct, and California has the right policy construct. It's fundamental, and you have to give whatever his other foibles may be, Schwarzenegger a tremendous amount of credit for executive order that set up reducing greenhouse gases by 2050 by 90% or so over what they were in 1990. Governor Brown, Jerry Brown came in, second time around. He reinforced that decision by Schwarzenegger, adopted strongly the cap and trade program which started, and we're on and is absolutely, as a leader, the executive leader of the state of California, committed to rapid greenhouse gas reduction, rapid increase in solar energy, rapid increase in electric vehicles and all other non-polluting forms. And without him, the rest of us would have a very difficult time. First Schwarzenegger, now even in more pronounced fashion, Jerry Brown. And all of us who are appointed by Brown understand that and do our best to articulate and carry out those policies and practices as fact. And it started at the top, and all of us feel this state can be a beacon for this world. That's what the real game here is. We're 1% to 2% of carbon emissions in the whole world. It's what this state can do to show leadership and the relations we have with China and elsewhere that can further enhance that policy perspective and thrust that will have ultimately a more dramatic impact on the portions of the United States that heretofore are still back in the 60s and 70s in terms of mentality.
Mike may just have given his closing remarks. We're moving closer to the audience-driven, the Q&A portion of the agenda. So as we come to the end of the discussion among the panelists here, I want to bring it back to what we started with, which is the topic, the innovation and the impact of regulation and the nexus there. So we started out with some thoughts. We've had some discussions about individual barriers and individual experiences about that. I'd like to invite each of the panelists, and Lyndon, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll come to Elon, and then President Peavy. So after this discussion, I'd like to hear 3 or 4 sentences of, okay, what's your conclusion? What conclusion do we want the folks here to hear about what are the takeaways about innovation and the impact of regulation? And with all due respect to Elon's hatred of analogy, I'm going to say that if you're able to work in underwater hockey as an analogy, you'll get a lot of extra points from me.
Well, working with this business, I've learned how to hold my breath. Is that good?
Hi, that was pretty good. How many people here know there's such a thing as underwater hockey? All right, so first you have to say what it is, Lyndon.
Oh, really? Okay. It's a game where you play ice hockey, the ice melts, you just keep on going. No, really, it's your mask, fins, snorkel. There's a team in San Francisco, one-handed stick, lead puck at the bottom. Hold your breath, go down, play as long as you can before you run out of air. Give the puck to your buddy, get up some air, and you do that for 30 minutes. A lot of fun.
Okay, I want to point out that's what he does for relaxation.
So actually back to... now I forgot what your question was.
The regulators set the rule book for the sport. What role does the rule book play in innovation? What's your conclusion? What's the takeaway?
Oh, okay. Actually, I mean, I couldn't imagine the job of the complexity of a regulator has to face, but I do know that in terms of energy, this is probably the most exciting time for any regulator to be in the space. everything is coming together, innovation is coming together, technology is coming down to a point where you can actually change. We don't have to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. It will curate the same result if you keep on burning fossil fuel. So now it's very important to look at the innovation that's occurring and see and allow the adoption to occur, apply it, remove the constraints, and then address the incumbents. So what we don't want to have happen, because this is when it can get really, really painful. The innovation continues. The energy infrastructure starts adopting with the new innovation. And then the old business model still continues. What happens is you build out even further two energy infrastructures. At some point, someone has to shut down. And if you fast forward 10, 20 years, I don't think you're going to be shutting down the clean, cheap energy. You're going to be shutting down the fossil fuel-based energy. So the best thing to do is to know that both infrastructures are going to get built, look at it and go, do we need to build this? Can we use technology and innovation to have a transition that occurs? Add storage, add solar. So you don't build out two infrastructures. So I think that's the challenge and going to be the excitement for regulators.
I agree with everything you just said. The only thing I would add here is, I mean, for us as regulators, is to try to create and induce and create and see manifested this innovative culture again and again and again. And it's happening all the time. And I'm not so worried about those two going lockstep together up like that, because it'll be like, you know, in 1902, people were talking about what's going to happen to the buggy whip manufacturer and what's going to happen to this and that, and they all finally, then they just drop off, and the other grows. And what's happening in this energy sector is the players are, there's so many new players now, you can't keep track of it all. And I mean, when you see Google buying Next so that they could have another avenue into the home, and offer services heretofore not even imagined a few years ago, and not imagined probably by any of the IOU, the investor-owned utilities today. And Google investing in this and investing in solar power towers and everything else. I mean, think of all the new entrants and what dynamism and creativity that represents. And what we have to do, while understanding that we have to protect consumers in this process, is not impede that, but promote it.
Elon, what's the takeaway on innovation and regulation, the role of the rule book in innovating?
Well, I think the rules need to be set such that they maximize the innovation ultimately for the benefit of the consumer, or you know, the citizen of the country. And really, I think they need to be towards the long-term benefit, not just the short-term stuff. And I think those rules are all the difference. The right rules will ensure that we move quickly towards a sustainable future, and the wrong ones will ensure that we do not. So.
I think that's a great way to bring this portion of the afternoon together. While we get the microphone holders ready to go, let me invite the audience to join me in a round of applause for our three panelists. Lyndon Rive of Solar City, President Michael Peavy of the California Public Utilities Commission, and Elon Musk of many things. Let's see, we have, which side would you like to go to first?
Well, I've already sold the first question.
All right.
So I'm going to go. I have not sold the first question.
Hi, my name is Jamie Chang. I'm a Solar City customer and hopefully a future Tesla customer.
Thanks.
My question is for Elon, and this week there was a Morgan Stanley analyst that talked about or set a bold future utopian society that's only 12 years away. I'm curious what you think about, or if you could share your vision about how you think about autonomous vehicles and how that'll change the way we travel.
Well, I think it'll be a long time before we get to true autonomous vehicles. And I think what we'll have is actually something we call sort of autopilot, similar to what you have in an aircraft, where you still have a driver, but you massively reduce driver workload, and effectively improve safety, and just make it easier to go from one place to another. And I think we'll have some pretty exciting things in terms of the of autopilot capability in the next couple of years from Tesla, and we'll keep refining it and making it better over time. But I think we'll need drivers just as we have pilots for quite a long time into the future.
Sure. I'm Danielle Murray. I'm from the San Francisco Department of Environment for one more day. So a question for President Peavy. We hear a lot about how the electric utility industry needs to change if they want to maintain their business. But how can we increase the speed of regulatory innovation to match that?
Well, first place, the premise I think is a little off there. They don't have to change to maintain their business. Their business is changing. Their fundamental business is changing. And I think the nexus between an energy utility, particularly electric side, because this is much slower on the gas side, is inexorably changing at a pace faster than we would have seen a few years ago or anticipated. Solar City is just one example of that. I think that we are doing an awful lot to stimulate or accept that change, and those companies will become, and they'll still be very profitable. Remember, they're great cash cows. There's a lot of money, $1 billion a year plus in earnings that companies like PG&E and Edison and Sempra and all make. They'll become wires companies for quite a while, until ultimately that is diminished by storage. But there'll still be a significant need for wires. And they have a lot of money to invest in other things. So companies like Edison now are investing in solar companies, and so is PG&E and so forth. The race goes to the swift and to the clever, and the people that guide those companies that have those resources that Elon wishes he had in 2008, just $50 million. That's something infusion at that time would have made all the difference in the world as Christmas Eve came around. I mean, they have that money to exploit and invest, and if they're smart and clever, I think they have a very secure future. But it's not the same business as they have today or had 10 years ago, because it's direct access, which is a different form of competition, changed that to begin with. Community choice aggregation, like in Marin County and soon Sonoma County, is also changing that business model. It's not solely technological innovation that's changing, it's institutional innovation too. And how well you manage the technological and institutional innovation will determine how well you succeed as what we today call utilities of the future, in my view.
Hi, I'm Tobias Kemper from Deutsche Telekom. My question is for Elon. You have taken known solutions to problems that seemingly only governments could implement, and in this case, build your own power grid for electric vehicles. I'm curious, given the fact that we know how to produce fully sustainable products, like your Coke bottle there, or plastic bottle, how would you approach the implementation to accelerate those solutions?
The implementation essentially of sustainable power and generation and vehicle driving. So what? The
question is, for example, given that we know how to produce.
Let's make sure we get you on the mic so the folks can
given
hear.
that we know how to produce this Coke Light plastic bottle out of fully sustainable materials in a fully sustainable way, how would you use your expertise to accelerate the implementation of those methods?
You mean of power generation, or do you mean of Coke bottles? I don't know about Coke bottles. I don't have a ton of expertise on Coke bottles, honestly. Yeah.
It could be any product. So basically, moving on from recycling and doing less bad to doing something beneficial and fully sustainable.
I'm not quite sure how to answer your question. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't worry too much about you know, like garbage, you know, like this you know, this recycling of garbage and stuff like that, of various types of garbage. That's you know, that's important, but it pales in significance to having sustainable clean power generation and consumption. You know, the world's not going to die because of Coke bottles, but it could because of if we destroy the climate. You know, so we've got to prioritize sustainable power generation. That's and consumption, obviously. That's the thing that if we don't solve it, I mean, it will be extremely dire for life as we know it.
Well, can I just add a word to that? I think that, and this doesn't answer the question entirely, but I think that the development which we've done in California and the European Union has of a cap and trade program that progressively lowers the cap will force all industries, including that makes this bottle, into more efficient, more sustainable products. And that is, I think that is the answer. Now, some of these products are far more significant than others. Whether this endures for 50 years as a plastic bottle is a lot different than whether coal is gone. There's no question about that. But the central policy thrust of cap and trade or carbon taxes or whatever that ratchets down constantly will force innovation and stimulation of better products and more sustainable products over time, in my view.
Yeah. So. Yeah, my name is David Fan. The question's for Elon. Elon, earlier in the talk, you mentioned how to drive down the cost of batteries. So my question would be maybe for the Model S, for its battery, say 3-4 years from now, how by percentage, what are you going to be able to drive it down to approximately, say 3-4 years from now?
Well, and if you can relate that to state worker salaries, that would be very...
For our vehicle after the Model X, we're aiming to produce a smaller car than the Model S, like maybe 20% smaller, but it'll be probably half the cost, so around $35,000 with a 200-mile usable range minimum. That's our goal.
About the battery in particular.
Yeah, so, well, in order to achieve that, you've got to reduce the cost of the battery. Since the car is 20% smaller, the pack would therefore be 20% smaller, but we've got to get to in total a 50% cost reduction. So that means that the cost of the pack and the rest of the car has to drop by another 30%, which I believe we can do with economies of scale, vertical integration, and design innovation.
Hi, my name is Administrative Law Judge Catherine McDonald, and my question is actually for President Peavy. We've been talking about innovation and the impact of regulation. My question is, how do we stimulate and encourage innovation within our own walls to approach problems and solutions in a new way?
That's a little, that's probably too much inside baseball for most people in this room. But certainly reforming our civil service practices would take us a major step in that direction. I mean, we are so encumbered internally in our operations, rules, regulations, procedures, and everything else. Some statutorily imposed, others imposed by ourselves, upon ourselves, all in the name of this good or that good. And I think that we can do with a significant amount less of that. In all candor, the biggest change for me in some ways from being in the private sector to coming into the Public Utilities Commission was how little freedom of action I truly had, particularly when it came to personnel matters and other things. That all the strictures were so limiting and so frustrating that I would, say to Clannon, "What in the hell's wrong here?" you know, kind of thing. I mean, it's why can't we do this? Why can't we do that?
Are you claiming that's in the past tense?
Well, no, on that point, no. But I mean, and so this is a problem separate from the topic that we're talking about here. But it's an inherent, I think, an inherent problem of the functionality of government. In all honesty, whether it's at the local level, the state level, or the federal level, is that we have become so encrusted with rules, procedures, and regulations that freedom of action and innovation is very, very difficult. To some degree, you have more innovation and freedom of action and all in the military than you do in the non-military sector of all our lives. And I think that's a very interesting comment for those of us that are kind of took a dim view of the military for much of our lives.
Hi, Ethan Elkind. I'm with UC Berkeley School of Law, and I work on climate change policy. I had a question about the battery packs in vehicles once they no longer have enough capacity for driving, and wondering if there's thought about what's going to happen when we have tens of thousands, if not millions, of battery packs that are done with their primary use but could potentially have value as a secondary use. So wondering if there's been thought given to that, I guess probably for you, Elon, but also Lyndon, if Solar City's thought about entering that kind of market or thinking about how to enter that market.
Lyndon, why don't you take the first stab at that?
It hasn't, I mean, absolutely there'll be a second application. Right now it hasn't been a strong focus on the company directly, as all the batteries are relatively new. But as soon as it does there, I mean, if there is life in it, it's a great application to add it to solar.
Yeah, I mean, we're expecting sort of the battery use to be sort of in the 8 to 12 year time frame. So as Lynn was saying, since we don't really actually have any production cars older than 8 years, there's not a lot of batteries yet for reuse, but it would definitely be the smart move to take batteries that are maybe at, say, 60% capacity, it's you know, too low to be convenient in the car, but still great for stationary storage. They'll have a greater economic value as stationary storage rather than recycling. But you know, all the packs either will get used in stationary storage or recycled, and then certainly when they do eventually reach end of life, will go through recycling. So they'll never end up in a dump or anything like that.
Hi, my name is Danor, and I'm a solar entrepreneur. My question's to Lyndon and Elon. I want to bring design into the conversation. Rooftop solar, since it's cheaper and it's cleaner, it's definitely going to take it to a certain point in the market. But there's another argument that real mainstream adoption could also come from making something really desirable, something that people really want more than they really need. Just what Tesla, Nest, and Apple have done. So my question is, do you agree with that? And if you do you think there are design opportunities to capture people's imagination when it comes to solar and something inherently unsexy as that?
What?
Sorry.
I have a point.
Let me clarify. Something as inherently unsexy as electricity. Because people spend no more than 6 minutes a year thinking about electricity and what turns on their lights.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, that point itself is probably the biggest challenge that we face, is educating people how electricity works. Most people don't know what their bill is. Most people don't even know what a kilowatt hour is. They don't even know what their price per kilowatt hour is. And if you do a poll, I haven't done this poll, but I suspect it would be like 60-70% of the people don't know what the bill is. More will know what kilowatt hour is, but
yeah, most people don't know what the difference between power and energy is.
Yes, yeah, exactly. In fact, we often refer to power because people relate to power better, but we sell energy.
Yeah. So
on the aesthetics is really important. We made an acquisition just recently, a company called Zep Solar. One of the primary reasons for the acquisition is their systems aesthetically is the best looking systems in the country. So it's a lower flush mount. There's no rail. There's no top clamps. So it looks more smooth. Now with our resources, we're going to continue to invest in that. And as Elon mentioned before, you want to get it to a point that, holy, look, he's got a solar system.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, come look at my solar system. So we really have that, a lot of that already. It's encouraged by the financial savings, and majority of our business comes from referrals. But you want it to be even a stronger pool. Instead of 30, 40% of our business coming from referrals, 80, 90% of our business coming from referrals.
Making solar sexy, yeah.
Yes. I'll have to add foreplay to the solar as well then.
Hi, Adam Langton. I'm with the CPUC Energy Division, and my question is for Elon, and it's regarding battery swapping. And I wanted to see if you've announced that the Model S is capable of supporting battery swapping, and I wanted to see if you could give us an update on when that would be, when you think that'll be commercializable and done in practice, and how you think that will impact the way you sell or even lease vehicles, and potentially the way it impacts the battery warranty.
Sure. So the Model S was designed with fast pack swap in mind, and we actually demonstrated that last year and did a live demo where we were actually able to swap out the battery packs in 2 Model S's before faster than you could fill up a gas tank. So in about 90 seconds to swap out a pack, and the fastest gas station in LA took 4 minutes to fill up a gas tank. So we're planning to implement that between LA and San Francisco to start off, and then see what the customer interest is, and whether people, you know, what percentage of people use that versus supercharging, and then you know, expand that capability accordingly. So that's our game plan. We're a little delayed on that because we got preoccupied in a few other issues, but we're hopefully going to get that enabled in the next few months between LA and San Francisco.
I have a question. If we imagine a carbon neutral or nearly carbon neutral future, including the carbon costs of producing the windmills and the solar panels, which out of the missing pieces are there's just like no technological solutions? Which ones are there's technological solution but it's too expensive? And which ones are there's a technological solution, it's cheap enough, but existing players are blocking it? And what are the regulations for each one of the categories? Are they different for each one?
I'll take a first stab at that. So the challenge of just looking at a direct specific cost is you're not including the external cost. So when you don't include the external cost, you can either include the external cost, which is hard, or you could incentivize those who aren't doing bad things. But if you look at the actual cost reduction that solar has had over the last few years, it's been quite amazing. Just our cost itself, we've reduced our cost in the last 4 quarters by 30%. So with scale, renewable energy will be cheaper than fossil fuel-based energy. But we do need to get to that scale. And it's just an application where you're delivering at the place where it's needed versus having massive centralized locations where you have all this transmission and distribution that you have to take to get it to the point. I think that was your question.
Marty Mattis, I'm a regulatory lawyer. Elon, I wanted to ask you, there's been a lot of talk about electric vehicle batteries possibly contributing toward shaving the demand curve, shaving the peak demand off of the electric utility demand curve.
Right.
I'm wondering if you see that as that characteristic as of any value in the marketing of your products.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think shaving that peak demand is very, very important. I mean, I should say it's not yet at a stage where it's an issue for utilities. Like I think utilities will tend to overplay the degree to which there's excess solar power being generated. So, but certainly I think once you hopefully get to about a 20-30% solar power generation in a particular section of the grid, you definitely need the storage in order to buffer that energy. We're many years from that, but it is a very important part of the equation, and we're not being shy about marketing it, but we do want to make sure we can meet the demand for that. That's actually part of what Tesla's sort of been doing with the Gigafactory, the giant battery factory, is to make sure that we have production capacity at a compelling price to enable large-scale use of stationary storage. So we hopefully we'll have that plant up and running in about 3 years.
I'm Renee Frisse. I'm the founder of Social Tech, and it's a company that focuses on how we can use technological innovation for social good. And I was wondering, we talked about a culture for innovation, and we talked about game changers. I was wondering if, while you were definitely changing the game and having these great innovations, if you come across things that we could use for completely different fields, but that will have a huge social impact as well, and if you are at least thinking about that and perhaps come across things that hinder you or enable that, that could be a question for either one of you.
Yeah, I mean, we do face this quite often with, as we continue to scale, there's just a natural friction in this. Often there are utility case studies talking about a cost shift that occurs, and I know that's a lightning rod. And to me, that whenever I hear that word cost shift, it is a wrong word to use. The word they should use is revenue loss, because that's what it is. There's a revenue loss. There's no cost shift. There's no cost moving. It doesn't cost more. But you are losing revenue. Based on the utility business model, when you lose your revenue, you get to claim it from somebody else. So that's the issue. But
if you want to maintain your revenue.
If you want to maintain your revenue. and actually, on that point, I mean, I actually won't go that far down yet.
It's a revenue shift.
Exactly. So it's a revenue shift. I need to keep my revenue. And so that's what it is. But it's not costing anything more. And so whenever you see cost shift reports, think revenue loss report. And you don't need to do a study for that. If you were getting $200 from the customer before, and now you're only getting $50, you have lost $150. There's no study you need. You've lost $150 revenue. But there wasn't $150 that was cost shift. So that's the key thing. And then in social media, this is where we can help educate the Okay. But even then, it's an area where it can help.
Sorry, what question would you say? Like what?
So let me ask you just to hold until we get to the microphone.
Yeah, I'm sorry for mixing it up. So it's not social media, social affairs. Let's say you invented
this. Is the Bay Area.
Yeah, I know. That's okay. I'm Dutch. We don't do that here.
Yeah.
The battery, could you use it for something completely different that will help people otherwise? Let's say you invented this battery. What else can we use it for, and how can we make sure that all the innovations that you are making are spreading around so we have this snowball effect of good causes and not only in the energy field?
Well, I mean, the battery is really, at least for the stationary battery is really primarily intended to solve the uniform power distribution problem. To be able to generate power continuously and to address peaks and valleys in renewable power consumption. So I'm not sure how in other ways how it might be effective. I mean, certainly the battery will be having high energy density, low cost batteries will be effective in all modes of transport. I mean, ultimately, I think all transport will go electric, with the ironic exception of rockets.
No, the cord's not long enough.
So it's a tough one. No way around Newton's third law. I think rockets can be renewable in that you can generate the sort of rocket fuel with electricity and atmospheric constituents. But
Elon, it's the space elevator with the electric cars going up and down. That's
right. Even if a space elevator was useful, you still have to do something once you got to the top of it. You still need a spaceship at the top of the elevator. But I think we can ultimately move all terrestrial transport to electric with the right battery capabilities. Planes are the hardest because you have a very high energy density requirement in order to have long range. But planes will transform too, and then we make sure that the power generation itself is not carbon creating; it's long-term sustainable, and we've got a good shot. So I mean, I'm a big fan of the sun because we've got this giant fusion generator in the sky. It's kind of there, sort of for free. It's going to be there for a long time. So that, I think, is our primary power generation mechanism, but there's also obviously a lot of wind. Wind is great, geothermal, tidal, there's lots of things.
Yeah, actually, Vote Solar had a quote. When you have a solar spill, it's called a sunny day.
Right, exactly.
Well, let me see if I can answer this question in a little different way, a little more mundane way. But my staff and I were talking about this yesterday as an example. We have a massive program here, the Public Utilities Commission, that all the utilities implement called CARE. It's basically a program for low-income utility users, electric users, if you will, right? Now we have the capability through mapping, through Google and many other things, to know where these people live. Now this is going to send horrors up to those, the Tea Party types. But and think if maybe with the cost of solar coming down, and let's take southeast Los Angeles County, a lot of very low-income area. We could put solar on many of those homes that are low-income recipients, and therefore give them the direct benefit of lower-cost energy instead of the CARE program. You follow me? And at the same time, reduce greenhouse gases. That's a twofer. That's the kind of thing you're talking about. That's the kind of social thing that I think will ultimately occur. Well, how fast and all that is up to many of us, including, as Lyndon said, the prices keep coming down and everything else. There's many applications like that. I think we will find it's depending on our own creativity and ingenuity.
Yeah, but I mean, so worth emphasizing just how far away we are from this. If you look at, say, cars, there's 100 million new cars roughly made every year. There's an installed base, or an existing fleet of almost 2 billion cars
worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah. And the number of electric cars being made is not even 0.1%. So, I mean, that's pretty tiny. And
solar's this is slightly different, but it's almost the same parity.
Yeah, exactly. But let's assume like if all cars went to electric tomorrow, it would take 20 years to replace the fleet, and we're not even close to all new cars being electric. No. Solar is not even keeping up with the rate of new home production.
No.
So there's, I think, 700,000 or something like new homes made every year. And so the home number of homes in the U.S. grows by just under 1% a year, and solar's not even keeping up with the new home production, let alone existing homes.
The industry would have to quadruple just to address the new housing stock.
But that's the difference in this state.
Oh, yeah.
We have a policy in this state by 2020 that's zero net energy consumption on new homes for this state of California. Again, an example where you could be the pace setter and the leader. That's what the nation has to do.
Right. But it's important to appreciate that just how tiny it is.
Sheer numbers.
And the sheer numbers are really quite small. It's like utilities really shouldn't be
actually,
complaining. It's like the utilities like it's a giant and there's like someone tapping on their toe,
Yeah, actually,
pretty silly.
On that point, a big lightning round, of course, is net metering, but the cost of net metering today is 0.3% of their revenue. So that the whole back to your point of touching the toe, it's touching the hair of the toe.
Yeah.
So it's
we're not even past the decimal point. So it's like maybe wait until we get there at least.
Hi, Evan Hinman from STEM. This question is primarily for President PV. There are some elements of the electricity industry that seem to make regulation especially hard. The first one is the long asset lifetimes of, let's say, a rooftop solar, 20 plus years, or a transmission line, maybe even 50 plus years. Also, the high technical complexity of keeping the frequency within a few thousand hertz across the state. So how do you think about regulation in that framework? And also, how do you speed up innovation in something with these hurdles around regulation?
Well, you're talking in some instances, the examples you've given. This is just the life of the asset until it's totally depreciated. And actually, some transmission lines are 100 years old and still going. I mean, they come out of Big Creek up in the southern Sierras and go to Southern California. They're over 100 years old. They've been updated in various respects. Got power plants there that are 80, 70, 80 years old. The hydro plants. But they're largely depreciated. They're not the challenge. I don't think they're the challenge. I think the challenge is fostering and promoting innovation. So you move that decimal point significantly, and that's the challenge here. Not worrying about some of the long-lived assets of the past, which are largely depreciated. To be honest with you.
And just one point: the expected life of the solar system is 30-35 years.
Well, there's some dispute of that, that's going to be played out before this commission in the short term, but we won't go there any further.
I throw a little plug there.
You got it in.
Hi, my name is Molly Sturkle, and I work in the Energy Division at the Public Utilities Commission. For 4 years, I helped run the CSI program. The woman to my left ran it for the 2 years after me.
That's the California Solar Initiative.
And the man to my right has a signed copy of the bill on his office wall. So that's Ed Randolph. So I want to ask about consumer protection.
You wrote it.
Literally, best program in the world. No, I kid you not. It's the best program in the world.
Okay. You hear that? It's good that you have it on your wall. Okay. So I want to talk about the post-CSI world a little bit and consumer protection. So the CPUC has a mission statement that says that we are to serve the public interest by protecting consumers and ensuring the provision of safe and reliable utility service and infrastructure at reasonable rates, it says. So in the post-CSI world, beyond the CSLB, the Contractor State License Board, there is not a lot to protect consumers from bad solar industry actors. Probably everybody in this room has had a negative experience with some kind of contractor, maybe a plumber, maybe an electrician, maybe a roofer, maybe you've heard about one. So as Solar City grows, it seems to me that one of your big concerns to the future world should be how is the industry going to be able to withstand itself in the face of the fact that some of your competitors are going to become bad actors? So I guess my question for you and for the whole panel is, do you need regulators to help focus on consumer protection in the industry, even when we're not focusing on rates or we're not focusing on incentives, so that your business can continue to grow and innovate?
Yeah, so as a consumer, you need to make an educated purchase. When the provider who's providing you with electricity is fully aligned with your personal interest, the likelihood it's more probably than not that it'll be fine. The whole PPA environment has kind of addressed a lot of the concerns. If it's not producing electricity, you're not paying the vendor.
And PPA is power purchase agreement.
Yes, yes. So If the system is not installed right, if the quality is not high, you're not paying the vendor. It is also a highly competitive landscape. If you build a bad reputation, you won't get customers, and your acquisition cost would go too high, and eventually you go out of business. So as the industry matures, there's already ton of standards, ton of regulation in the safety and the quality of systems that get installed. So let's think of all the stuff that you already have. Your safety regulation, you already have your inspection that occurs from the city inspector, you have the utility inspector. So there's a lot that goes on. But then the construction part itself, you may just hire a bad contractor. Hire somebody that you know that you can review their training procedures. You know that that they've got good work, and you should have a good experience.
But that's not a very satisfactory answer, I don't think. And I don't know. I think I'm frank enough to say I don't know the exact answer in these instant cases. On my own experience with solar hot water heating in the 80s, rooftops in La Cañada, where is my principal home, and in San Francisco, where I had a home. In both cases, after 10 years, the system was gone, and we just tore it off the ceiling and roof and junked it. It just didn't. It didn't work, and there was really no. And we had bought the home. Someone else had put the solar on it in one instance, and the water heating, and we didn't have any recourse. There was nobody to have any recourse to, and so I mean, you have to.
Hundreds of thousands of consumers like you in California had that experience with solar hot water. And it destroyed the industry for 30 years.
Yes, it
now
did.
you've got a great company going, and it could destroy the industry again, is what my question. So what do regulators need to do to make sure?
What do we do to ensure that the good players succeed and the bad ones don't? And how do we make that judgment? And that's where, that gets to be a very perilous area here as to, government intrusion here. And I don't have a simple answer for you.
But I just want to point out the slight difference in the hot water. Remember, in the business model where you're selling energy, your incentives are aligned with the customer. So in that exact case, if your business model is to sell hot water per gallon, you would have to come, upgrade the system, because you want to sell more hot water. So, and that's the majority of solar being deployed in the country right now is selling energy. So the incentives with the provider and the customer are aligned. If the system's not performing, if you don't come fix it, you don't get paid. And then you build 20-year contracts off this, you go out and raise debt, you get all this stuff. You have to fix those systems.
Hi, my name is Rob Cannon. I actually work in the private equity industry. And my question is really at a much higher level. Elon, I think when I think about what Tesla's accomplished in terms of a consumer luxury good being what the company has done and Solar City expanding to such a large customer base across the country as well, where do you see the influx then for regulation to allow for greater amount of public companies, or private for that matter, to go in to establish an infrastructure if we're working on such a finite timeline? So we've outlined the problem. We know not necessarily a definitive date on which it will happen, but we're talking about something that is inevitable. And yet, with other forms of energy, liquid natural gas, fracking and everything else being so mainstream and popular, especially at a federal level and at an export level to those other countries that we've alluded to, where do you see other companies then stepping in beyond luxury goods or beyond luxury items to be more mainstream and to find that point at which the large scale costs needed can then go and become something that we have, not just as a state of California, but as a country, show that model then to the rest of the world. So they look at it as something that's much more measurable in a way that we're not saying, Elon, you gave the example of the cars, needing to replace all of the cars. It would still take 20 years. Well, that seems then that we need to do something 10 years ago, not now. So how do we then motivate those other companies to do something like Tesla did and see that Tesla was able to profit very, very well from it and continue to perform well, but still not be adopted by companies outside of automobiles or solar for homes and stuff like that? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure if I totally understand it, but I think what we've seen in the car industry is that the movement towards electric vehicles by other car companies seems to be driven, for the most part, by what the minimum requirements are of the regulators. So it's kind of been kind of disappointing. And actually, California is a leader in that regard. So it's like, so when, for example, the California zero emission vehicle mandate, which was actually set in place because to improve the air in metropolitan areas. It wasn't actually anything to do with CO2 or greenhouse gases. It was actually just because people were breathing unhealthy air, still are really, in major metro areas, but the regulatory requirements are so meager in those cases that the big car companies can get away with making virtually no electric cars, or a very token amount. I really think those regulations need to be strengthened, because I think the only other way it's going to happen is with competitive pressure from companies like Tesla, but it's going to take us a while to really exert any competitive pressure because we're so little. We're trying to get there as fast as possible, but those are the only two ways I can see it happening. You know, I think, you know, solar is sort of a similar situation. It's but a different. I mean, seriously, similar. It's a different class of problem because you've got a monopoly provider of that's entrenched, and so that's actually even more dependent on regulatory support, because otherwise the monopoly provider would just squash any incumbent.
Yeah, and solar is still suffering a little bit from the old stigma that it is a luxury good and that it is expensive. People still can't wrap their heads around that you can just get it and just pay for the energy.
Hello? Yeah, my name is Yuan Rong. I come from Apple, and I'm managing a big part of the iPhone product development systems. So I had a question for Elon in terms of batteries. We did, as you probably well know, we at Apple is probably one, as well as Tesla, is probably one of the biggest buyers of batteries. So we did quite a bit of thorough studies on batteries. We understand that chemistry, material, packaging, and process does affect cost and performances. Mm-hmm. But just there's one thing I cannot understand. Really want to get an answer from you is we bought a lot of pouch materials in terms of form factor. And as we know, Tesla is buying all 18650s. Right. In terms of portable electronics application, we see the difference between the two form factors to in our application is pretty minor from a system perspective. So my question is, what's so special in electric vehicle applications and grid storage applications about 18650?
Well, in what energy density are you getting in the pouch cell?
Sorry, can't talk about it. Otherwise, I get sued.
I'm sure it's public domain at this point. Somebody's probably pulled a laptop apart or an iPhone apart. But you know, at the 18650 level, we in high production, we can get to 260 watt-hours per kilogram. That's considerably better than any pouch cell that I'm aware of. And the cost per kilowatt hour is also the lowest in the 18650 format. So that's really, those are the two things that matter the most. And so it doesn't make sense for us to go away from the 18650 format. It does make much more sense for Apple making, say, a cell phone or a laptop, because the 18650 format is, you know, it's sort of 18 millimeters in diameter, so you can't do something like a MacBook Air or an iPhone because you'd have a minimum dimensional tolerance of 18 millimeters plus your packaging.
President Peavy, I'm on. Timothy Allen Simon, former commissioner. This week, President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg proposed a 15% per gallon fuel tax. 15 cents. 15 cents per gallon fuel tax. When we're talking about decarbonizing transportation, do you see this as more effective than cap and trade, or complementing cap and trade?
I think that the right move is a carbon tax, and I'd advocate a broad carbon tax, but to the degree that if one can only get sort of a fuel tax, that's helpful. But I think in general, the sensible thing to do is to try to correct the unpriced externality, which is the carbon capacity of the oceans and atmosphere, by adding a tax, and then one can adjust that tax accordingly. If we're seeing the right behavior, which is the movement towards renewables, then we know the tax is probably high enough. If we're not seeing that movement, it's not high enough. And frankly, our taxes on gasoline are very low in the United States, as I'm sure you know. It's compared to the EU. So the EU taxes, I think, maybe 3, 4, 5 times what they are in the U.S. It's way higher, and it makes a lot of sense. And it actually does drive people to use more fuel-efficient vehicles, smaller cars, that kind of thing. Think more about the cost of gasoline. So I think any tax on what is not good for the environment, not good for our future, that's the thing one ought to tax. I mean, I think that's the best argument for overall for taxation of carbon is like we know we need to raise taxes somehow, and it makes sense. It's just common sense that we'd want to tax the things that are probably bad way more than we'd want to tax the things that are probably good or neutral. If we're going to collect the same amount of money at the end of the day, we should bias the tax structure just as we do in many other walks of life, where we tax cigarettes and alcohol more than we do bread, and that makes sense. And so I think it's just seems like common sense to me, but seems like super obvious, but yeah.
Well, for a contrary view, at least in part here, as an economist, I would preferred a carbon tax when we started down this road in California, but politicians don't like to be associated with taxes. So, and the EU has done the cap and trade model, and so we copied that. I mean, Mary Nichols and I, we went there 2005, 2006, looked at all this. Now we have adopted a cap and trade model for the state of California that the cap will come down every year, the ceiling will get lower, and the direct impact of that will be, in this instance, on the oil industry and on the refineries and all that. So they would prefer to have someone else pay, right? And the idea of the tax per gallon is very appealing to the oil industry. And so I think the biggest supporter, and the only supporter of this so far, if there is one other than Senator Steinberg, is the Western States Petroleum Association. They think this is really neat stuff. Gets them out from under the cap and trade. But I don't think that it makes, I think you have to look at this in kind of holistically. And I don't think you should take one sector out from the overall scheme of cap and trade, which is money is increasing there. Of course, there's probably some difference as to how that money ought to be spent on high-speed rail, things like that. But I think that program is a good one, and this is not the time now to tamper with it. And my guess is there'll be very little appetite to do anything about this, particularly in an election year, in terms of that formula that he's come up with.
Yeah, I can just say I think it's time for us to get serious on a carbon tax on a national basis. I mean, any economy, yeah, exactly. Basically, it's economics 101. I mean, it's like really. This is
British Columbia's done it. I mean,
yeah,
but
it's like so obviously the right move. I think politicians ought not to be afraid of it. I think they ought to give it a shot and do a carbon tax. The time is now.
Yeah, I mean, just so people understand, it's not that your taxes increase. You're just shifting it.
You just shift it.
You shift it. So just to understand, it's a carbon tax. We all pay your federal taxes. Right. Okay, your 25% that you pay, put whatever percentage to the carbon, and that's just a shift.
Yeah, yes, but elected. I mean, let's be candid here. I mean, elected officials like to have things indirectly rather than directly.
Well,
that's the
because
nature of it. I agree that a carbon tax on a national basis would be better, speaking as a policymaker, but I just don't see that happening in the short term. I don't see Obama embracing it. I don't see anyone else embracing it that's in office. And so then you go to second best, and you don't want the good to be the enemy of the, the best being the enemy of the good. Major policy in this area has been adopted in the state, and we're moving in that direction. And I hope that we stay the course until we can go to a broader base, which would be on a federal level. That's my personal perspective on this.
Hi, my name is Ashwin. I work in the solar industry. My question is around financing. Traditionally, the expansion and proliferation of DG and solar around the world has relied on government credit, or 700 plus FICO credits and investment grade buyers of power. There are programs like the CARE programs and other low-income housing programs, but typically, at least in the U.S., federal tax equity investors are major banks and quite conservative in terms of who they will and will not finance. How can innovation and regulation help expand solar or battery or other high upfront cost items to allow for financing to the masses?
So for the regulation or innovation? So it is true. So if you look at the history of solar financing, it started off with a FICO score of 720. And like other financing, it's binary. Either you're in or you're out. When you buy a house, it's not binary. It's just your cost is higher. As the market has matured, it's gone down to 700. Then it went down to 800. We're now starting to see 650. So that will really start broadening the market. Another key interesting point, when we look at our deployment, the majority of our adoption is in zip codes with low to medium income. So it's not the big wealthy homes that are doing the majority of the adoption. It's just the average household. And as you drop the FICO, that will improve. As data supports the default rates, investors will get more and more comfortable. We just did a securitization. It's the first securitization in world history of solar assets. It was a big lift, and we succeeded at that. But the data just shows that it's unlike a boat financing or something else, that it is an energy bill. So the default rates are extremely low, and then the tax equity guys will start getting used to this, and then they'll open it up and drop it down to 650.
More question, and then do some closing remarks, because I know President Peavy has to leave promptly at 3:28 or 3:30. Oh, okay.
It's on. Thank you. I'll be really quick since we're at the end. My name is Bob Barish. I've just happened here by happenstance today. I'll just say really quick: drought, fear, game changer on energy and water, and implications for what you've been talking about today, because change happens in crisis. I've been watching energy for 40 years. It's been a long, hard slog to get to here. It seems to me a drought of a few more months or a few more years like this is a game changer, whether it's caused or aggravated by human activity or not.
Sorry, I'm not sure what the question is.
The implications of drought.
For the drought. Okay. Sure. I'm not the best one to answer that question.
So this is actually a perfect application for solar. So solar doesn't use much water at all. Here's a crazy fact. I think most people don't know this. This isn't a U.S. fact. The average household uses more water in the creation of electricity than water consumption itself. Think about that.
That's a good point.
Okay. So all the curtailment that's occurring in California for the drought, it pales to the benefit of installing a solar system. Because by installing a solar system, you essentially netted out your water consumption. So as market plays out, back to the external cost, you have carbon, that's another external cost.
Sorry, let me make sure we get you on the microphone now.
Yeah, well, I mean, but look, we don't know if the consequences, how long this is going to last. We do know from, thousands, looking at rings and trees, that we could be in a very prolonged drought period. On the other hand, we've had situations where it's rained like hell in March and April in this state, and it's come back out of it. If this lasts more than a year or two, it will require some fundamental rethinking of how we use water in particular, because we don't have enough water compared to all the demands for water. And 80% of that water goes into agriculture. And the crops that are most demanding are cotton, alfalfa, rice, and a few others. And there's some we ought to get away from some of that and let these things be done elsewhere. There's a lot of other aspects that could be done in water conservation and a much better use of groundwater, so-called toilet to tap, all those kind of things we will be forced to do if this drought continues, and it's a game changer in that regard. I think, yes, I think that the governor and others realize that. But trying to predict in the short term weather functions from is just almost impossible. But it is a warning bell that we have to be a heck of a lot more conscious of this and have to move to a far more sustainable environment.
And let me invite each of the panelists to speak just for 1 minute or 90 seconds, closing remarks, anything that's on your mind. Elon, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think the most important thing is for regulators to ensure that there's rapid adoption of sustainable energy. It's overwhelmingly important. I really hope that someone politically does do the carbon tax. It's the smart move. It needs to happen now. And I think if we do take action now, the damage will be limited, still be significant but limited. And if we don't take action now, it's going to be far worse than anyone realizes.
Lyndon, closing remarks.
Being in California, I'd say, is fantastic. California has led the way in this. It has shown a massive movement towards solving this problem. It's set the stage for many other states and countries to follow. So I actually think it's a super exciting time to be in this space. We're going to see this transformation occur. There's going to be resistance, but eventually everybody will get on the same page and solve the problem.
And Mike Peavy with the last word.
Vote Democratic.
I'd like to thank Marzia Zafar, the director of the PUC's Policy and Planning Division. I'd like to thank Lyndon Rive of Solar City, President Michael Peavy of the Public Utilities Commission, and Elon Musk of many things. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.